My best friend went to prison for my crime. 20 years later, he knocked on my door. I never thought one night could define the rest of my life. But 20 years ago, it did. Back then, I was 17, reckless, stupid, and loyal to a fault. My best friend, Evan, and I had been inseparable since childhood. We grew up in the same neighborhood, played on the same baseball team, even shared the same first crush. He was the kind of guy who always had your back no matter what. And I was the kind of friend who didn't deserve him. It started as a dare, a harmless, teenage kind of stupidity. Break into Mr. Hallman's old auto shop after hours, grab a couple of beers from the back fridge, and leave. We weren't planning to steal anything else. Just a dumb stunt to prove we weren't kids anymore. Only, that night, Mr. Hallman was there. I still remember the creak of the metal door as we slipped inside, the smell of oil and rust, the echo of our whispers bouncing off the walls. Then, a voice. "Who the hell's in here?" The flashlight beam cut through the dark, blinding us. Evan froze. I panicked. I shoved past him and bolted for the back door. I didn't even look back. Then I heard it. A crash, a shout, glass breaking, and finally silence. When I turned around, Evan was on the ground. Hallman was bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow, shouting into the phone, calling the cops. Evan just looked at me, dazed. And I did the worst thing I've ever done in my life. I ran. They caught him that night. By the time I found out, it was already too late. Hallman told the police that Evan had broken in, attacked him when caught. The tool that hit Hallman was found with Evan's fingerprints. He never mentioned me, not once. I wanted to confess. God, I did. But when I saw his mom crying outside the courthouse, something inside me broke. My own dad had just lost his job. We couldn't afford a lawyer. The thought of prison terrified me. So I kept my mouth shut, while Evan took the blame. He got 5 years, but served 15, parole denied twice. I went to college, got married, had a son. And every year, every time I saw his mom at the grocery store, and she smiled at me, I wanted to die a little. I wrote him once, just once. I told him I was sorry, without actually saying what for. He never replied. Then, 20 years later, he showed up at my door. It was a quiet Sunday morning. My son was playing video games. My wife was out with her sister. I heard a knock, heavy, deliberate, almost hesitant. When I opened the door, I didn't recognize him at first. He looked older, obviously, thinner. His hair was graying at the temples, his eyes sharper but tired. There was a scar along his jaw I'd never seen before, but it was him. Evan. Hey, he said softly. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My throat went dry. Evan? Jesus, man, He just nodded. Can I come in? I stepped aside automatically. My hands were shaking. He walked in slowly, looking around like he was trying to remember the kind of world he used to live in. The silence between us was suffocating. Finally, I said, You're out? Yeah, he said quietly. A few weeks ago. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Guess you heard. I hadn't. I tried not to think about him for years. Then he looked me in the eyes, really looked. You've got a nice place, Mark, he said. Big house, family, job. You did good for yourself. The way he said it made my stomach twist. There wasn't anger in his tone, just something worse. Resignation. I swallowed hard. Evan, save it, he said gently. I didn't come here for that. Then why are you here? I asked. He stared at the family photos on the wall. Me, my wife, my son at the beach. Then he looked back at me, eyes shining with something I couldn't name. Because, he said quietly, I need you to help me find out who really did it. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Find out who really did it. My mouth went dry. I knew exactly who did it, me. Evan. I managed to say, my voice barely more than a whisper. What do you mean who really did it? You know what happened that night. You were there. He nodded slowly, eyes still scanning my living room. Yeah, I was there. But, Mark, he looked back at me, expression unreadable. So were you. My stomach turned to ice. He sat down on the edge of the couch like he'd done this 1,000 times before. I've had 20 years to think about that night, he said. And I know you didn't mean for any of it to happen. But I also know I didn't hit Hallman. Someone else did. I blinked. What are you talking about? It was just us. He shook his head. No, there was a third person. I felt my pulse start to race. The room felt smaller. Evan, that's impossible. It was just us two. He leaned forward, eyes locking onto mine. Then why did the police find 2 sets of footprints outside the shop? One was mine, the other, smaller. I froze. I'd forgotten about that. Back then, the cops had mentioned footprints, but I told myself they belonged to me. Maybe they did. Maybe I just didn't want to remember. Evan exhaled shakily. Hallman's dead now. Died 2 years ago. Heart attack. But before he passed, he told someone, his niece, that the night he got attacked, he saw another person running away. Someone wearing a red jacket. My blood ran cold. I remembered that jacket. It was mine. He stood up and walked to the window, his reflection flickering in the glass. I want to know the truth, Mark. I don't care if it hurts. I need to know who really put me in prison. I tried to breathe, but guilt pressed down on my chest like a weight. The room blurred. My thoughts raced. Excuses, lies, fragments of memory. But then I saw him. Really saw him. 20 years of lost time carved into his face. The life he never got to live. The youth that turned into silence and steel bars. I couldn't tell him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. So I lied again. I'll help you, I said quietly. We'll figure it out. Over the next few days, Evan and I met several times. At a cafe downtown, at the park where we used to play baseball, and once at the edge of the old auto shop, now boarded up and covered in graffiti. Each time, he talked about new theories. Maybe Hallman had enemies. Maybe one of the older guys from our neighborhood had snuck in that night too. And each time, I nodded, pretending to think, while inside I was falling apart. The guilt wasn't new. I'd lived with it for years. But seeing him now, free, broken, hopeful, was unbearable. Then one afternoon, he pulled out a small envelope from his jacket. I got this from the police records office, he said. Something you should see. He handed it to me. Inside was a faded photograph of a footprint in the dirt outside the shop. Right next to it, a ruler for scale. The print was small, narrow, with a distinctive tread pattern. You recognize that? Evan asked. I nodded slowly. My throat burned. No. Should I? He tilted his head. It's the same pattern as the shoes you used to wear back in high school. Remember, the red Nikes? I felt my body tense up. He knew. He didn't say it outright. Not yet. But his eyes, the way he watched me, told me he'd already guessed the truth. Evan. I started. But my voice cracked. He smiled faintly, not angry, not bitter. Just tired. It's okay, Mark. You don't have to say anything. That almost hurt more than if he'd screamed. We stood there for a long time. Finally, he said, I used to hate you. For years, I dreamed about finding you and making you pay. But somewhere along the way, that hate just burned out. I realized I was wasting what was left of my life on someone who wasn't even there anymore. You moved on. I stayed behind. He looked down at the photo again. When I got out, I told myself I'd come find you. Not for revenge, just for closure. I needed to see your face when I asked the question that's been haunting me for 20 years. He looked up. Why didn't you stop me that night? I didn't know what to say. My lips trembled. I was scared. He nodded. Yeah, so was I. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the dark. My wife called, asking if I was okay. I told her I was just tired, but I couldn't stop shaking. Because now, for the first time, I realized something terrifying. Evan didn't come to destroy me. He came to forgive me, and I didn't deserve it. For tonight's, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Evan's face, calm, quiet, waiting. Not accusing, just waiting. I thought about all the moments I'd stolen from him. The years behind bars. The birthdays missed. The people he'd lost. He went to prison for something I did. And the world just went on like nothing happened. I told myself that staying silent spared everyone pain. But it only spared me. By the third morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I called him. He picked up on the second ring. Hey, I need to see you, I said. My voice cracked. He was quiet for a moment. All right. Where? The old bridge, I said. Sunset. The bridge sat on the edge of town, overlooking a dried-up river that hadn't seen real water in years. It was where we used to go as kids to talk, to dream, to escape. When I got there, Evan was already leaning against the railing, the dying sun painting his face in gold and red. He didn't turn around when he heard my footsteps. I knew you'd call, he said softly. I took a breath that felt like knives in my lungs. You knew. Yeah. You've been carrying this for too long. He turned to face me. His eyes weren't angry, just tired and somehow gentle. So tell me, Mark. Tell me what really happened. I wanted to run again, to bury it for another 20 years. But I couldn't. Not with him standing there, still giving me a chance to do the one thing I'd never had the courage to do. Be honest. So I told him everything. About the dare. About how I pushed past him when Hallman showed up. About how I knocked over the shelf. And how the wrench had fallen. How it hit Hallman's head as I ran. About how I turned around, saw Evan on the ground, and fled. My voice broke halfway through. The wind carried my words away. But he heard everyone. When I finished, he didn't move. He just stared at the riverbed below, Finally, he said quietly, "You could have told them." "I know. You could have saved me." "I know." I whispered again. "I was a coward." He nodded slowly, almost like he agreed, but not cruelly, just stating a fact. Then he asked, "Why now?" I swallowed hard. "Because I can't live like this anymore. Every time I look at my son, I see what you lost. I can't tell him to be a good man if I never had the courage to be one myself." Evan's jaw tightened. His eyes glistened in the fading light. "I hated you, you know," he said, "for a long time. I imagined what I'd say if I ever saw you again. Sometimes I wanted to hurt you. Sometimes I wanted to forgive you. But now that you've said it," he exhaled, "it just feels empty." We stood in silence for a while. The sun dipped lower, and the shadows stretched long. Finally, he said, "You should tell someone. The truth, I mean." "I will," I said, though my voice trembled. He nodded once, then started to walk away. I called after him, "Evan." He stopped but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I mean it. I'd give anything to undo it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You can't undo it, Mark, but maybe you can live better than I did. Maybe that's enough." Then he walked away, into the dim light, until he was just a silhouette fading into the evening. That night, I couldn't eat. I couldn't speak. I sat at my desk, staring at an old box I hadn't opened in years, newspaper clippings, photos of us as kids, and that one unopened letter I'd sent him in prison. I tore it open. My own words hit me like a knife. "I'm sorry for everything. I wish I could have stopped it, but I never had. Until now. So I did what I should have done 20 years ago. I wrote a letter. Not to Evan this time, but to the police. To Hallman's niece. To anyone who deserved to know. I told them everything. Every detail. When I finished, I signed my name at the bottom. My hands were shaking. For the first time in decades, I felt lighter. The next morning, I drove to the station and handed the envelope to the clerk. I didn't know what would happen, charges maybe. Or maybe it was too late. But as I walked out, I saw Evan standing across the street, watching me. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just nodded once and walked away. And in that moment, I knew what forgiveness really was. The letter changed everything. I didn't expect it to. Part of me thought they'd just toss it in a file somewhere. Too late to matter. But a week later, I got a call. A detective asked me to come in for a statement. He said they'd reviewed my confession and reopened the old case, not to punish, but to close it properly. Hallman's family wanted answers, and they had them now. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. My wife found me sitting at the kitchen table, pale, shaking. "What's wrong?" she asked. I told her everything. Every secret I'd buried for 20 years spilled out. The break-in, Evan, the lies. When I finished, she just stared at me, tears pooling in her eyes. "I don't even know who you are," she whispered. And for the first time, I didn't try to defend myself. I didn't make excuses. "I'm the man who finally told the truth," I said quietly. She didn't answer. She walked out of the room, and the sound of her footsteps was louder than any argument we'd ever had. The next few days were a blur. I gave my statement, signed papers, faced the press. The story spread through town. The man who let his best friend take the blame, finally confessing after 20 years. Some called me brave. Most called me a monster. And honestly, both were true. Evan didn't call. He didn't show up. But I didn't expect him to. He'd already given me something I couldn't ask for, peace. One evening, about a month later, there was another knock on my door. When I opened it, he was standing there again. Same jacket, same quiet eyes. "I heard what you did," he said. I nodded. "I had to." "I know," he replied. We stood there for a long moment before he said, "They called me in, to verify everything." I told them the truth. That it wasn't me. That I should have said something back then, but I guess we both were scared kids. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," I said. He looked at me and smiled faintly. "I'm not sure forgiveness is something you deserve. It's just something that happens when hate runs out." Those words hit me harder than anything else ever could. We sat outside on the porch for a while, not saying much. The air was cool, the crickets loud. After a while, he said, "I thought prison would ruin me, but it taught me something. That time doesn't heal you. It just gives you space to decide what kind of person you'll be when the pain finally fades." I swallowed. "And what kind of person are you now?" He smiled, looking out at the dark street. "Free. For real this time." Before he left, he pulled something from his pocket, a small, folded piece of paper. "Remember this?" he asked. It was a photo. Faded, creased, worn, to kids, maybe 12, covered in mud, holding baseball bats, grinning like idiots. Me and him. I kept it all those years, he said, to remind myself there was a time before all the pain. A time when we were just kids who didn't know any better. He handed it to me. I don't need it anymore. But maybe you do. I stared at the photo long after he was gone. The faces of two boys who thought the world was simple, good and bad, right and wrong, stared back at me. They didn't know how complicated life could become. A few months passed. My wife slowly started speaking to me again. My son asked questions, hard ones, but I answered them all honestly. It wasn't easy, but it was real. One morning, I drove out to the bridge again. The sky was gray, and the river below shimmered faintly with the reflection of clouds. I took out the photo Evan had given me, looked at it one last time, and then let it fall into the water. It floated for a moment before sinking beneath the surface, vanishing completely. I stood there, feeling the wind on my face, and realized something. I couldn't change what I'd done. I couldn't erase the years he lost, but I could live the rest of my life carrying the truth instead of the lie. And that, maybe, was the only kind of redemption I was ever meant to have. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "We're good, Mark. Don't waste the rest of your life looking backward." For the first time in 20 years, I smiled, a real, quiet smile. Not because I was forgiven, but because I'd finally forgiven myself.